Most of you who joined us this morning already met Kelly Bysouth, who is the Chief Supply Chain Officer for IAC Group and has a key role, of course, across procurement and supply chain and logistics roles. But we're also very pleased we're able to not only diversify the perspective from women in the supply chain, but of the roles and even industries that we're covering today. So we have a very special guest today as well, in Kathy Crawley, who is the General Manager of Transportation and Head of Transportation Operations Management for Amazon. This is a really key role, as I'm sure Kathy will indicate more of, a key role in the central service support for Amazon, in supplying support for maintenance and trucking and licensing and training. So very excited that Kathy can be here. She's been with Amazon 11 years in various roles and has also worked in industries like aerospace as well. Keenly involved with key associations like Women in Trucking, which we're also keen to make sure you learn more about today in our panel. Also joining us, very pleased that Mauryo Jones, who's the Vice President, Safety, Health and Security for Ryder, playing a very key, central, critical role to the sustaining proactive safety culture and maintenance at Ryder across, which is of course a very large and important fleet. So again, a fantastic perspective to bring, and diverse perspective to bring to what some of our other panelists are today. And also joining us, I'm very pleased, Jennifer Sarah, but don't call her that, J.S. Bolton, who is the Director of Finished Vehicle Logistics, as well as for strategy and systems, supply chain systems and strategy at Nissan North America. So from a functional side, we have fantastic representation. We're not going to talk so much today about, or in this session, about those operations as such, but clearly we want to understand more about pathways for women in supply chain and logistics and ways that we can make this more visible, as I've mentioned. I want to start, as I feel the topic warrants, I just want to start with a bit more about each of our panelists' stories in this industry, their growth and progressions in this industry, so we can understand that. So I'm going to just ask each to tell us a little bit about how you started in this sector, and maybe when you also realized it was an area that you could grow and develop personally. And so, JS, I'm going to start with you, and we will vary the order so that everyone doesn't echo everyone all the time.
Sure. Well, I started in logistics and supply chain actually on a different part of the industry. I was in investment banking on Wall Street, focused on transportation companies, so trucking, railroads, logistics, but from an investment banking perspective. Meeting a lot of the executives through that made me think that, hey, maybe it'd be cool to be on that side of the table, actually moving goods rather than making spreadsheets. So when the opportunity came to come to Nissan and help launch a warehouse, that was really getting my feet wet in the industry. At Nissan, although I did start in supply chain, specifically inbound parts, logistics, warehousing, I've spent most of my career in manufacturing and only recently moved back to finished vehicle logistics.
Fantastic. Great. Mauryo.
Well, my story, sorry, a little loud. My story actually begins not on purpose, but by accident. Actually, with Ryder being the leader in supply chain logistics, it was my first job straight out of graduate school. Didn't know anything about logistics, didn't know anything about transportation, just happened to start my career in that role. And then, of course, through the evolution of all the things related to supply chain, I quickly realized that the supply chain industry, logistics industry, is a great industry with many opportunities for growth for any field, really, when you look at the whole grand scheme of how logistics and transportation works. So I'm happy that it was by accident, and 22 years later, I'm happy to be a part of this industry.
Fantastic. Kathy.
Thanks. Yeah, so my story started directly out of college, and don't know if it was purposeful, but I was actually on the procurement side of the supply chain and did that. Then I had an opportunity to move to Amazon and take a transportation role. So I've actually spent my entire time with Amazon on the transportation side. And I think when you talk about, is it purposeful and how do I know it's right for me? It really is just about the opportunities within transportation and then also just overall supply chain. It really is coming into Amazon, I was like, I don't have any transportation experience, but it's all about the problem solving. So the skill sets that you learn in other supply chain roles translate into many other opportunities within the supply chain.
Thank you. Kelly.
Yeah, I stumbled into supply chain. So I actually went to Michigan State, but did not get a supply chain degree. I got a finance degree. Graduated in 1992 and really intended to work in corporate finance. But at that point in time, the job market wasn't really cooperating with my planned career choice. So I ended up stumbling into a purchasing job and decided that I really liked it. So I actually never worked in finance. I started working pretty directly into a purchasing role, and then did that for a number of years and honed my skills in purchasing. And I think about 2016, I got the opportunity to take on a truly end-to-end supply chain role, which I actually requested of our CEO at the time at Johnson Controls, because I really felt that there was opportunities in the gaps, and bringing that whole thing together and looking at it holistically end-to-end was going to add value to our company. So I took that on, and that's kind of where I've been since then, loving it.
So it's not unfamiliar to hear that sometimes people stumble into the industry, but then find the growth path, find the way. Whether the next generation has more purposely entering, we'll see. But I think I'm glad we've stolen a few away from finance, as this panel sort of shows already. Now, the end, well, let's say there's already the good news that we know everyone on this panel has progressed in this industry. So the next question, can be somewhat mitigated by the fact that you've overcome them. But I'm interested if you did face barriers, or did feel and face some barriers as you get started or at various points of your career, because we do want to address some of those issues and make sure that the lessons are learned in terms of how we overcome them. So Mauryo, I want to turn to you first. What were there and what were they that you faced?
I think you started the conversation with the transportation industry being truly male-dominated. And that in itself, especially for a woman, can be a true barrier, especially for younger women or women just entering the workspace. And so first, conquering that self-doubt or that lack of knowledge or that managerial courage that may be lacking with women, that can be a true barrier, which is really an important skill set or attribute that I feel very strongly about, making sure that when we're talking to women and you're talking to women in your organization, making sure that they feel that, you address that, and they know what development opportunities exist, so that won't be a barrier for their career development. So I think for me, the biggest barrier to that is just overcoming that self-doubt that may exist within women in themselves.
That's an important point. Kathy?
Sure. I think if you talk about, just to address the question too, about if there were barriers, I will say I've been pretty lucky, and I wouldn't say that there's been any where I felt not included, but I know that there's many, possibly even in this room, where you don't have this inclusion culture day to day. So just really speaking, making sure, one, walking through the self-confidence, I think, is the one piece, and having, maybe you all as being an ally, male or female, being an ally to someone sitting in the room where they can't speak up because they're just keep getting interrupted, or someone's not listening to their point, be an ally and make sure we address that immediately. I think just making sure, continuing to create this culture of inclusion, and then just addressing any, we'll say there may be this feeling of a quote-unquote boys club, but how are
More effective and more thoughtful about it.
Kathy, anything you would add, and perhaps as well in terms of, I like what was also signaled there, the person who speaks up for you in a room that spots the opportunity, again, whether that's male or female, of course, that shouldn't matter, right?
Yeah, I can just expand a little bit. And one of the things Kelly was stating is, different people that are your mentors and different aspects of where you want to go. I've actually heard of this too, is like, do you have a personal board of directors? So do you have a group of people, because you may need to, have we'll say maybe a life decision or a really tough problem, but you want to ask multiple people. So I have a few key I'll say part of my personal board of directors that I'll ask the same question to, because you're going to get different answers and different opinions because based on what their experiences were. So we've kind of coined this, or I want to say coined it, but I've heard of it called a few things on your personal board of directors and who you go to. And they're just talking about sponsorship. Yes, I think sponsorship and mentorship is key. I think J.S. really brought it up, where I learn from the people that I'm mentoring and how they're thinking about a problem, because you may now open up another door of how you're thinking about that problem. And then I think just when you talk about sponsorship or male or female, and those in the room, but who's going to stand up for you on the next opportunity, kind of like you mentioned, and then really, or who's going to be your ally on if someone's saying we should give it to this person, but who's going to fight for you to say, no, really, we just talked about this other person having better traits or better results and driven results, but now we're picking this person because we say this person may not be able to travel. So who's going to fight for you on those opportunities even when you deserve it?
Something that has come up in some of the discussion is around having a plan for yourself and then having someone help. And I think that's a really important point. And although we also admit that in some cases we stumbled into some of the things that we did, and perhaps the plan had to develop along the way, is it somehow a bit more of an incumbent on a woman to make some of those plans in terms of defining some of these life choices? I mean, I'm not sure if every man is thinking or at least that's the way the culture is right now. Kelly, in your experience when you're working with younger women versus younger men in your teams, is there a distinction to how that planning has to sort of start early on?
I'll be honest, you may not want to hear it, but in my opinion, no. I don't, in dealing with people on my team that I believe maybe are high potential individuals, I like to have a very direct conversation about, hey, I think you've got something, and what do you want to do with your career, and having the very direct discussion of, hey, if you want to get from this position to this position, there's sacrifice involved, whether you're a male or a female. It just doesn't matter, in my opinion. Again, everyone makes choices, and you can't do it all at the same time all the time. So again, success requires sacrifice. So those are the discussions I have. Honestly, to me, it's not really dependent on male or female.
I've had a different experience. I have both men and women on my team in leadership positions. And I do see a distinction from the standpoint of self-advocacy, whether it's with a man or a woman. The men on my team, I don't know, sometimes they're very much more forward with their self-advocacy versus the women on my team. I laugh, but sometimes I'll tell some of the guys on my teams, like, wow, you put the sun in the sky too, right? They have no problem promoting themselves. They have no problem sometimes forgetting to recognize the team aspect and not just themselves. And so for me, dealing with those dynamics and the differences, it does matter. And as I mentioned in my opening statement before, for some of the women, making sure that they realize the importance of being your advocate. Of course, yes, you have mentors and sponsors that are going to be your advocate, that's going to speak your name in the room, but you have to be your own advocate. At first, you have to be your biggest advocate, and what does that look like? Because there's a fine line between being arrogant and confident, and I find sometimes, depending on if it's a man or a woman, they teeter the line on one side or the other. And just knowing and recognizing that and highlighting that to the people on your team, it makes a big difference, because a lot of the men on my team, they also are managers and directors to women. And I want them to know and understand the differences so that they too can be those mentors and sponsors to the women on their team and recognize that and coach that. So it's important and to recognize the differences, and I do see it on my team.
Yeah, I think sometimes you have to, and recognize that people might not raise their hand. So I'll give an example. We were posting for a promotion from like a frontline supervisor to a second line manager. And let's say there's 30 supervisors in the pool, which is about what there were, and any of them could be eligible for this promotion. Now, we knew based on their performance who the top kind of 5 were, and those were the ones we were really hoping would apply. And when we saw who initially put in for it, 2 of those top 5 were women, and neither of them had raised their hand. And so why is that? Is it the confidence versus arrogance? And when we went and talked to some of them, they said, oh, well, I don't know that I have enough experience. Maybe in a couple years I'll feel more comfortable. And sometimes you have to have a direct conversation. Well, hey, just give it a shot in an interview. You might not get it. And I'm certainly not saying this because we're going to pick a woman. We want to pick the best candidate, and we think you're one of the strongest candidates. And I don't think it's a bad idea to have those nudge conversations. But after I did that, I also had a conversation with the direct managers of those people, and I said, well, why do you think they didn't apply? Have you been encouraging them the same way you would encourage someone else on your team who's very strong? Maybe the way you encourage people is different and needs to be specific to that person's personality and their leadership style and their perception of themselves.
Important points. We talked about this a little with JS before when you mentioned, challenges perhaps in the manufacturing space where you might have night shifts, and that might be a barrier. But across your functions, you look across a variety of positions that will go towards leadership roles or go through, let's say, some strategic areas of planning, purchasing, data analytics, but also frontline operations, warehousing, trucking, etc. And you want, as to JS points, you want the best person to develop in those roles. But again, but is there a guiding way that you're working with some of, in this case, the women in those teams to help develop in the right area? Because, we don't want, just because night shifts are blocking, we don't necessarily want to dissuade people from some of those paths either. And trucking as well, right? There's long distance trucking, which is certainly not always conducive. But does that mean, or it shouldn't necessarily mean, that we close off a path? So I'm just curious as how, when you're working with your teams, you try to identify those opportunities. I don't know if it's clear in the question. I'm saying, we don't necessarily want to always push them away from the frontline areas, I think. Mauryo, maybe I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think just from a company culture standpoint, every company hopefully has identified what they consider to be leadership attributes, leadership skills, right? And you have both those hard sets of skills and you have those soft skills. And just firstly, making sure that everyone, all levels, understand what those skill sets are, right? And I know when I'm dealing with my direct reports and even folks on my team, we talk about that, not just during, end of year appraisal time or year evaluation time, but I challenge them to look at those attributes, those leadership skills, because at a writer, when we talk about leadership or being a leader, we're not talking about from a title or position standpoint. It's truly a mindset standpoint. So when we deal with that, if you're a leader, that has nothing to do with your title or your position, but truly your mindset. And there's certain attributes and skills that come with that. And so I challenge my team and folks that they deal with to look for those opportunities of improvement or development needed and bring that to your direct manager and say, you know what, I need to build my business acumen in this area, or maybe I need to focus more on this skill set. And once you have brought that to your manager, then it's his or her job to put you in a position where you can then exercise those skill sets so that you can, see that growth and that potential. I call it just like a muscle. You want to exercise, your abs or your arms. You exercise it with weight, right? So you need to put yourself in a position, or your manager's job is to put you in a position where you can exercise those areas of opportunities. And so that's the same as you're dealing with diversity. If that's part of your company's goal, your company's core initiative, then first you need to accept where you are and identify those areas of opportunity or improvement, and making sure you have a plan in place to build upon that.
Absolutely. JS, when we spoke earlier and you were talking about, manufacturing is so much about people, actually. We think about the technology, but I mean, thinking about breaking it into those team leaders and sections, in some ways, those should be strong, and if there's equivalents, will come to them in trucking and warehousing too. Those seem also to be strong, important areas for women to develop in as much as anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think women are sort of stereotypically very good and caring at dealing with people, but that is a different leadership style than old school manufacturing, I'm the boss. And to have a truly inclusive company, you need to recognize that you can be a good leader with lots of different styles. And I think that's something that we certainly value, but it takes a long time for general corporate culture across automotive to change. There will always be those old school leaders who don't see more of a softer style. And also, there will be women who are very aggressive, and sometimes I'm one of those. So I think, being a people leader doesn't necessarily mean it's warm and fuzzy all the time.
For sure not. Kathy, when we look at the transportation industry and trucking, truck driver shortages, it's obviously top headline. And I'm sure for Amazon, as much as for automotive, but perhaps especially for Amazon, for which trucking is so important in terms of how you run your network. Addressing those issues starts from many levels, and so is in terms of licensing, training, etc. for women as well, in terms of getting women into trucking. How are you working at Amazon and with other groups to do that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things I can answer to this question. I think a lot of it starts with just providing. So we do have associate programs where we are actually sending associates have the opportunity to get their CDL paid for by Amazon, and then they'll come back and utilize those skills. I do think some of it comes back to providing equitable resources. So just even think of something as, I'll go to the front line since I don't want to echo a lot of the leadership that has already been spoken, but offering PPE that fits females. So, do the gloves, are they, they're complaining that these gloves don't fit, or, offering, or we require steel-toe shoes, and so what are the options for females with steel-toe shoes that are available? To just making sure that there's the same, as much as equitable opportunity, resources provided to them. I think when you talk about some of the activities that we do with women in trucking, we actually sponsor, many companies do, many in this room probably have too, sponsor Girl Scout events. So how are you educating girls in the Girl Scout events about what trucking is? It's not just, transportation is not just, what they would think as, a male can only drive a truck. That is not what transportation is. So, and then I think when you talk about, we were talking a little bit, JS was talking about team leaders, and if you're leading a group, whether, especially in the transportation industry, it is more male dominated, you could have, you're the only female leading a team of males, but they'll respect you if you know your space. Are you the SME? Do you know the same information? Do you have the knowledge? Not, I won't, follow what my leader says because they're a female. But if you know your space and you know the information, that's where the respect comes from. So.
Absolutely. Mauryo, from also looking in maintenance areas and things like that, again, traditionally more male-oriented, but shortages and issues in maintenance labor is also a big topic. So again, from within your teams and groups, how are you bringing more women into that?
This is definitely an important topic, Chris. And, we've looked at this issue holistically from, truck drivers and maintenance technicians truly being the backbone of the transportation industry. Starting just from just trying to recruit and really retain some of our female drivers that we have in the industry, definitely driver shortage as a whole. But when you take a look at just something as simple as truck ergonomics, right? I don't know how many of you have ever tried to raise or lower a landing gear or unlatch a fifth wheel, but it's tough. it's tough for a man. So when you look at that from a woman's perspective and trying to recruit women into this industry, we need to take a look as a whole from an OEM standpoint, as a truck driving company standpoint. What are we doing to make it easier from a physicality standpoint for women? And that if we truly want to recruit and retain some of the female drivers in our industry, that's an issue that we all need to take a look at from a truck ergonomic standpoint, making sure we have more automatic transmissions in our vehicles. And then we've even taken a look, we are also a maintenance provider. And so, we're trying to recruit female technicians and, more specialized positions as that such, but like for our facility and our maintenance facilities, some of the surveys that we've done and we received back says your bathrooms are disgusting, or they're not conducive for female folks to come in. So we have customers that have female drivers, and they don't want to use our restrooms. We have rental and maintenance operators that don't want to use our restrooms. So something as simple as making sure you have accommodations in the restrooms and the facilities for women, that makes a big difference. So just taking a look at the truck ergonomics, your facilities, all of that really helps when you're trying to recruit and retain female talent in this industry.
Really important points, and that's, great examples of things that, to a certain extent, are simple considerations, but really holistic, important points, when we think about how we're investing. And we're starting to see, if we look at, in Europe, I know some manufacturers have looked at shift patterns, making them more flexible. We have a lot of focus on ergonomics, perhaps for an aging population in the plant and in warehouses, but this thinking needs to be holistic across there, and I think that's important for the industry. I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of resources and groups that may be available for women in the industry, and in reality not just women obviously, but we're obviously talking about to develop that there, whether in your companies or that you work with externally, that you might cite as positive examples or opportunities for you. So maybe I'm going to start with Kathy, with you on that. What's important for you at Amazon? What has been important for you? What would be important for your staff and employees?
Yeah, sure. So at Amazon, we have recognized 13 affinity groups, but there's multiple other chapters. We also partner with a lot of the external organizations, but really, when I was thinking about this question, it kind of goes back to if your companies do not have, whether you call them employee resource groups, affinity groups, et cetera, how are you leading or starting this network for yourselves and your group, whether that's a women's group, an LGBTQ, whatever the case may be, how are you leading and starting this? Even, I'm sure many have met some friends here, but you can call that your, local automotive affinity group. So, but really it comes down to the resources. So where you may feel in a space with this affinity group, resource group, that you have these opportunities to ask questions. Maybe I don't feel comfortable asking directly a manager or my manager something, XYZ, or I'm experiencing a certain concern or a certain, I want to problem solve, but like your group, your network will probably have the answer and be able to help you. So I think for your employees, having an opportunity for them to group, whether that's women, like I said, with women at a Black affinity group, whatever the case may be, but a group where they can, one, be with like-minded or gender-like, whatever the case, or race, but for them to be in a space where they can, openly and feel safe to bring concerns and also to get opportunities. I think a lot of people end up finding, I found this job through, those that are in my affinity group. So it just opens up additional opportunities and additional resources for your employees.
Any other examples of that? Mauryo, are there any key groups that you're working with too with Ryder?
Yes, I think employee resource groups or ERGs are definitely vitally important. At Ryder, we definitely have a women's leadership forum. And like I said, when I say leadership, that encompasses all levels, not just folks in senior roles, but even forums like this, And one of the things that I encourage, like for now, this is a panel of 4 women. I really do feel and strongly believe that in order for us to make a difference or a change or improve, we need to make sure men are a part of the conversation as well. So, if you guys do this again next year, I highly encourage you to maybe add at least one man to the panel, because I think together, trying to understand where each position is coming from, that's going to help improve, right? So I can hear your perspective, you can hear my perspective. And the same with your employee resource groups that you have within your internal organizations. If it's just full of women, it's not going to make a difference. And also, it's very important that if you do have these affinity or these ERGs at your company, that one, you have the support from top leadership, top-down management. At Ryder, like I said, we do have a women's leadership forum. It's supported by our executive team. Our executive team are frequent participants of our resource forums, whether they're in person or via conference calls. So we have that level of commitment from the top down, which is going to be vitally important. And also, again, I can't reiterate the importance of making sure it involves not just senior leaders, but also those from middle and frontline management as well, and maybe some of your employee groups as well.
Thank you. We will take that advice on board. But on that basis of sort of hearing from men and making sure that voice is heard across. I mean, any comments, questions from the audience? And perhaps I'm sort of hoping it's a man to kind of give some perspective on how you've seen this, how perhaps any examples or experiences within your company. Don't all rush at once to volunteer that information, but please, if there is, whether that's here now during this session or afterwards, I think we do have a hand in the back there. Oh no, it was someone waving someone away, actually. Kelly, how would you see? We're talking here about employee advocacy groups. I mean, do you see there's an important next step to develop this, and from an IAC point of view, or for you personally?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I echo what everyone else said about the resource groups, I mean, huge proponent of that, did a lot of work on that in my past. The other thing that I've found as important in the supply chain role, and I say specifically procurement, I've spent a lot of time in the past promoting women-owned businesses within our supply base. So the more women you can help advocate for, give opportunities to, whether it's in your own company and your own team, or it's potentially out there in the supply base, and you're choosing, or at least you're giving those women-owned businesses the opportunity to be at the table to quote on significant projects, I think is incredibly important. And I've done a lot of work with that in the past, and been part of some resource groups, external resource groups like WeBank, et cetera, that promote women-owned businesses. So I think that's just another little flavor that I would add onto this, that everybody can do within their own company to try to give women-owned businesses opportunities.
That's an important point, especially from a purchasing perspective, the opportunities we have to develop companies and suppliers in these areas. I think, thank you for raising that. We've tended to focus here a bit more on organizations, but how, especially in the sorts of roles that many in this industry have, I think that who you partner with and help them develop is really key. Are there ways that the industry, shippers, logistics providers can actually work together better? From this is perhaps a good example of that, Kelly, in terms of promoting, if you like, certain businesses. But are there other ways, perhaps in the direction of what you said, Mauryo, understanding the facilities, other examples of collaboration where you think this would help between a shipper and logistics providers? Maybe I'll turn to you there, JS.
Well, I was thinking about your question earlier, and I didn't jump in and talk about employee resource groups. So don't take me not saying anything to mean that Nissan doesn't have a very valuable women's business synergy team, all of that. One thing I would say is that anytime you break a large company or large industry up into smaller groups where people feel like they have more of a personal connection, it goes a long way towards helping their development. So whether it's a company with tens of thousands of people and you have a smaller group where you can ask questions, get to know people in different functions, that's valuable. Then in the industry, be it, automotive, as automotive. I know there's probably a lot of folks in the room that have been involved in Southern Automotive Women's Forum, which a lot of the OEMs based in the South send women to the conference, and it's usually fairly junior women that are developing their careers to build a network outside of their own companies, other people to turn to with questions that can be very valuable. And then I think within logistics, it's how do you form connections with people that you might not, at least at first glance, have a lot in common with? So there's the value in forming connections with people you do have something in common with, and the value of how do you form connections to work successfully with people you don't have something in common with.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. Any other comments, questions from the audience? We have a few minutes left. I wanted to, right here in the front. A microphone coming.
I think there's another.
Oh, sorry. We'll start here, and that's only because it's my colleague who wants to ask the question. I'm going to privilege the audience otherwise.
Hi, I'm Ashley Haney with Norfolk Southern. I've heard so many great things today, and I'm wondering if you can give advice, especially for a working mom in the industry. What would you say to any mom just out there? I know that there are many other women who are not moms, but for moms specifically, keep going, some encouragement. You can't do it all the time, but eventually you'll get there. So what would you say to keep that momentum rolling?
I'll start. I would say, first of all, you have to delegate. I mean, you can't, like I said, you can't do it all. You have to figure out the things that are the most important for you to touch and delegate everything else, right? You don't need to clean your house. You don't need to, cut your grass, whatever. And then just pick the key things. And again, sometimes your career is going to have to be 100% of your focus. Sometimes your kids are going to have to be 100% of your focus. And I always try to pick the things that are the most important to go to. My kids know I'm not going to be there at their school for the Halloween party, probably. But I will be there for my daughters, when she wants me to be there for homecoming or her big swim meet or whatever. So I think just picking the things that are the most critical, and it's okay for your kids to know that you're not there 100% of the time. In fact, I think it's made my kids very independent, which I'm super proud of now that they're older. But you can't do it all. So,
Thank you.
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I'm personally not a mother, but I think what I have found really important is communicating your non-negotiables. So what is your non-negotiable, and communicating that to your leader. Because you can't be upset when your leader or someone else steps over your non-negotiable if you've never communicated what your non-negotiable is. So if your non-negotiable is, I don't take a call between 7 and 9 because it's my time to put my children to sleep, and somebody, then stepping over your non-negotiable because it was never communicated, then, So to me, it's pick your non-negotiable and communicate the non-negotiable.
Thank you. We had another question from... Oh, sorry. We'll go there then. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm Karen Zima with Road One. Thank you, ladies. Really great panel today. I've participated in a number of organizations along the West Coast in helping promote the opportunities in logistics and supply chain to the younger people at the high schools and even at the junior high school level. So I think that's pretty exciting because now supply chain's in the news. So I think we can actually get the word out there, not only to young women, but to young men as well about the opportunities, because with all the changes we're hearing about and seeing in our industry, we know we're going to have a major labor shortage. So I just want to encourage everybody in the room to reach out to your trade organizations and reach out to the schools in your area and talking to young people about what you're doing and about the opportunity that exists for them in our business. I was at a trade fair last week in Southern California at IANA, and we had a large group of high school students, and they visited all the trade show floor booths, and it was a great opportunity to tell them you could have a career in our industry because there's plenty of opportunity. So,
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for raising that. And I think we still have a question here, or is it? Yes, please, Hazel.
So my question was just, I was at a Wayne State event a couple of days ago where the students seemed particularly interested in how they could see where their careers progressed and how they could see how to take a step from one level to another. And that seems to be something, particularly as JS brought up, where maybe it's not always clear to particularly maybe women or to people who can't necessarily see themselves further up the chain, how to make those steps forward, when to take a level up in seniority. I was just wondering kind of how can that be kind of addressed or made more transparent and clearer to people?
Jess, do you want to start?
Sure. So I would say none of what I'm about to say is women specific at all. I think it's where the industry, large operations are going to in terms of best practices for talent development. One is transparency around the path. Clearly communicating, if you're looking to get here, here's the things you need to do. So one example that Nissan's been working on and working to perfect is, for a long time in engineering, we had what was called a career ladder. If you started off as an engineer, the way to improve your pay, get a engineer 2, engineer 3 title was very clearly laid out. But in supply chain, it wasn't. There were different levels of supply chain analysts, but it wasn't clear, how do I get from an analyst 2 to a senior analyst? So in our organization, we've tried to define that. So if I'm coming right out of school, I can look and see, okay, here's the things I need to do to get where I want to go. So I think transparency is really big. Another thing that is certainly a trend in HR and leadership is posting all positions. So a lot of organizations, I'm sure many you're in, previously, when you got to a certain level of leadership, it wasn't like an application and an interview. But I think that from a diversity, equity, inclusion standpoint, it is a best practice to post positions so that everyone has the opportunity to apply and at least put themselves out there.
I'll add to that. I think that is definitely important, especially when it comes to what we call transferable skills. Because I know from my generation, it was just you stay in the same track, right? So, for example, I'm in the safety, health, and security field, and my progression should only be within that field. But nowadays, especially in supply chain, there's so many transferable skills, and there's some value in what we like to call cross-pollination. So maybe I'm in this one functional area, but I'll go to ops, or maybe I'm in operations, I may want to go to engineering or data science. And so there's many opportunities. So by having that transparency and having the job descriptions and the skills needed, you may be in one area, but you say, you know what, I may want to try something totally different. And by having those skills and knowing what your skill sets are, and they may transfer to another functional area is key. And that's definitely an avenue or path for growth if you're interested in that new challenge.
Yeah, I'll actually jump back in because that idea of cross-pollination and rotations as being a road to career development is something that I think also we need to make clear in our processes. So I mentioned this career ladder we have. Well, if you think rotating to another department might set you back on that, you're probably going to be a little less likely to take that risk. But as an organization, we know we really value people rotating. So we have to set up our structures so that people's personal growth incentives are aligned with the skills that we want as a company to develop.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think we're probably coming up to what needs to end quite soon. But maybe a last question for me across the panel. And it's maybe the answer is obvious, but it's always good to ask it. We've been through so much disruption and challenges, and most of the other sessions talk about that, probably sleepless nights that the supply chain has caused. Here you are, great examples of progression. Is it a career that you still recommend to your kids, your mentees, your friends' kids, whatever the background is, the younger people, right? Is it still? I'm hoping the answer is yes. If it's not, then please tell us what we can do to fix it. If it is, though, how do we even make it more, what's the next steps over the next 5 years to make that even more accessible and that growth? So that's how I want to kind of end us. And let's start with you, Kelly, and then we'll go to JS and we'll come in so we're not doing the round.
Yeah, sure. I would say the first answer is yes. I would still recommend it. I personally feel I've had amazing career in supply chain, amazing opportunities because of this field. I would say I feel like I'm a little bit spoiled because I live in Michigan. I went to Michigan State. I'm in supply chain. So I have, honestly, in the last 2-3 months, I've had people coming to me unprompted, friends, family, girlfriends of friends, kids, et cetera, about, well, I think I should, I really want to explore supply chain. Can you tell me a little bit about it? I'm at Michigan State, I'm a freshman, and I've not chosen my major. I'm thinking about supply chain, which would never have happened in the past. Honestly, never. So I feel like we have, I absolutely would recommend it, but I feel like people are coming now because of, and I say, like, no one knew what supply chain was before, and now it's in every other word, in every news article you see. So a lot of people don't really know what it is still, but people are at least know what they've heard of the term. So I think we have a huge opportunity right now to pull younger people. I would also agree with what I think JS said, that supply chain has always been more diverse than the other parts of at least the auto industry that I've been have experience with, and it's even more and more now. So we get a lot of young people coming, a lot of diversity coming. So it's a great time in my view.
Exciting. Just to vary how the panelists were, I'm going to go to JS next.
My answer is also yes. I think supply chain's a field where there's never a dull moment. I also think we need as much good talent as possible. So we definitely want to be recommending it to as many people as possible. If we can make that funnel wide, then we can get the folks for whom it's a great fit.
Absolutely.
I'm going to continue with the broken record and say yes, most definitely. And it's just because of everything, all the opportunities that supply chain brings. When it comes to just pretty much anything your heart desires, you can find in supply chain. If technology is your thing, my goodness, most supply chain companies are going to become technology companies offering supply chain and logistics, right? If you're in a functional group like HR or accounting or safety, supply chain has it there, marketing. So it's just a vast opportunity. So definitely yes, and definitely would encourage it to anyone that's seeking that market.
Kathy, final thoughts?
Yeah, echo everyone else. Broken record, yeah, no, I would definitely recommend it. I think, agree with what everyone said around the whys. I think just when we talk about transferable skills, I think the other piece, and I'm just kind of bringing it full circle from this morning, is really going back to sustainability too. So the opportunities within supply chain transportation when it comes to, if your heart is really into the sustainable side, it is a great also opportunity to wrap sustainability into the supply chain.
I'm glad you mentioned that, and I think when we do, we have a session tomorrow on talent, as I said, with the students that we are bringing in, including from Michigan State. And I think purpose is now something for Gen Z or Gen Z and others. I think it's important for everyone, but I do feel like that is very important. What purpose, what does it mean for what I'm doing for the world, as well as for myself? And this is an industry that has that purpose perhaps even more strongly than ever before, as a lot of the things we're talking about. Thank you so much for taking some time to do this. Really appreciate it. For me, very exciting to be able to have this perspective. Yes, we will make sure that the view is even more diverse next time, and we'll encourage that from across our audience. But thank you so much. It's been eye-opening and really enjoyable.
Thank you for having us.